The sun disappeared behind the towering skyline of Dubai hours ago. The sky is completely dark, but down on the pavement, the heat of the day never actually left. It is 3 in the morning, and the concrete underfoot is still radiating a slow and suffocating warmth. Above you, thousands of air conditioning units hum in a relentless synchronized rhythm, fighting a battle that seems to have no end. The air moving in from the Arabian Gulf does not bring a cooling breeze. Instead, it carries a heavy moisture that wraps around the city like a wet blanket. You would expect the night to offer a moment of mercy, a chance to breathe. But the relief you are waiting for is not coming. Dubai was built to defeat the blistering heat of the desert day. It has spent decades engineering the perfect shield against the noon sun. But the most dangerous part of the summer here may not arrive when the sun is directly overhead. It may arrive after the sun is gone. Dubai was built to defeat the day, but now the city may be losing the night. When you imagine extreme weather in the United Arab Emirates, your mind instinctively goes to the middle of the day. You picture a blinding white sun, heat waves shimmering off the desert highway, and temperatures pushing past 50 degrees Celsius. We are looking at the summer of 2026, navigating a season known locally as Jamrat al-Kaith. In the traditional calendar, this translates to the glowing embers of summer, a time when the relentless hot Samum winds sweep across the dunes. The midday heat is undeniably brutal. It forces the entire city inward, behind thick glass and into deeply chilled environments. But the largest number on the thermometer is not necessarily the most dangerous number in this story. The day is in many ways a decoy. A 2024 peer-reviewed study, published in Communications Earth and Environment, examined the coastal regions of the southern Arabian Gulf, revealing a deeply counterintuitive reality. Researchers found that the maximum heat index, which is the point where the combination of heat and humidity places the most severe strain on the human body, does not always happen in the scorching afternoon. In many of the locations studied, these extreme peaks frequently occur in the evening or late at night. The reason is a volatile atmospheric collision. During the day, the desert bakes. As evening falls, the land cools slightly, altering the pressure gradients. This shift often draws a massive influx of marine air inland from the Gulf. But this is not a refreshing sea breeze. It is heavily saturated with moisture. When that deep humidity collides with the residual heat still trapped inside the urban environment, the air becomes thick, heavy, and physically punishing. The tourism industry sells the promise of luxurious Arabian nights, outdoor dining, and vibrant twilight exploration. But that promise suddenly collides with an environment that feels impossible to breathe in. The expectation that the setting sun brings safety is a fundamental assumption of human life. What do you do when darkness arrives, but relief does not? To understand why the night has become a trap, you have to look at what Dubai is actually made of. The natural desert possesses a specific thermal rhythm. Sand absorbs heat rapidly when the sun is up, but it also releases that heat very quickly once the sun goes down. A desert night can actually be surprisingly cold. But Dubai is no longer a natural desert. It is a sprawling fortress of asphalt, steel, glass, and millions of tons of concrete. Every single road, every parking lot, every towering skyscraper, and every luxury resort acts as a massive thermal battery. Throughout the 14 hours of summer daylight, these dense urban materials absorb the relentless solar radiation. They drink in the heat, and when the sun finally sets, they do not cool down instantly like sand. Instead, they begin to slowly and stubbornly radiate all that stored thermal energy back into the surrounding air. Dubai does not merely become hot. After sunset, parts of the city behave like a giant thermos, slowly releasing the heat collected during the day, trapping millions of residents and tourists inside. This phenomenon is known as the urban heat island effect, and in Dubai, its consequences are particularly severe. Observational studies analyzing the microclimate of the city have demonstrated that the temperature gap between the urban core and the surrounding rural desert becomes especially pronounced at night. In certain periods, data has shown that highly developed areas of Dubai can remain significantly hotter, sometimes averaging over 4 degrees Celsius warmer than the undeveloped desert right outside the city limits. For the millions of tourists who travel to Dubai, expecting to explore the marina or walk along the Palm Jumeirah after dark, the reality is a wall of radiating heat. The carefully designed promenades become hostile environments. This is a quiet crisis for the tourism sector, which relies on the evening hours to drive retail, dining, and entertainment revenues. If the night becomes unbearable, the economic engine of the hospitality sector loses half its operating window. But the economic pressure is only a secondary symptom. The primary victim of this trapped heat is biological. Buildings can be engineered to withstand heat. Human bodies need something far more fragile. They need time to recover. Human physiology is a remarkable and highly calibrated cooling system. When our internal temperature rises, our hearts pump blood closer to the surface of the skin, and we sweat. As that sweat evaporates, it carries the heat away. But this system has strict limits. When the ambient air is extremely hot, radiating from the buildings around us, and simultaneously thick with the moisture rolling in from the Gulf, evaporation slows down. The sweat stays on the skin. The heat stays in the body. Imagine a delivery rider pausing his motorbike under the faint glow of a street lamp, pulling down his mask to drink warm water, while the air around him feels like a damp, heavy curtain. Picture a maintenance worker stepping out from a heavily air-conditioned utility room onto a high-rise rooftop at midnight to check a failing compressor, instantly hit by a wave of heat roasting the tar surface. Or consider a tourist family abandoning their evening walk after 10 minutes, retreating to their hotel room, forced to leave the cooling system running at maximum capacity all night, just so their children can sleep. The traditional 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperature threshold is often cited as a theoretical upper boundary for human survival. But human trials indicate that dangerous physiological strain can begin at much lower combinations of heat and humidity, depending on age, sunlight, activity, and health. The World Health Organization warns that prolonged periods of heat extending through the day and the night create a severe cumulative stress on the body. You do not just reset at midnight. Without a cool night to lower the core temperature and allow the cardiovascular system to rest, the strain compounds. The United Arab Emirates recognizes this immense physical toll. During the summer, the government enforces a strict midday work ban, legally restricting direct sun and outdoor labor during the most punishing hours. This policy proves that the climate has already forced a fundamental reorganization of daily life and economic activity. I used to think a hot night only meant losing sleep, but for the body, it can mean beginning the next day before the previous one has ended. For a person, that produces exhaustion. For a city, it produces a much larger problem. Every protective system must keep running. If you walk behind any major structure in Dubai, you will hear it. A deep mechanical roar. Cooling towers venting massive plumes of warm air. Pumping stations pushing millions of gallons of chilled water through vast underground district cooling networks. When the sliding glass doors of a shopping mall glide open, a blast of freezing sterile air collides with the heavy damp heat outside. It is the front line of a permanent war. Cooling in Dubai is not a luxury. It is not an amenity for tourists. It is the foundational infrastructure of survival. It is the lifeblood of the data centers handling global finance, the hospitals preserving medicines, the airport moving millions of passengers, and the real estate market that built its wealth on glass towers in a desert. According to the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority in 2024, the demand for power is staggering. Official figures showed the electricity demand of the city had increased by over 5%, with total consumption reaching nearly 59,500 gigawatt-hours. The peak load surpassed 10.7 gigawatts. A massive portion of this energy is dedicated purely to fighting the temperature. There is a profound engineering triumph here. The technology and the power grid have successfully transformed an incredibly harsh environment into a thriving, continuous global metropolis. It is a marvel of human ambition, but that very success is exactly where the vulnerability lies. Dubai does not live entirely inside the natural climate of the desert. It lives inside a second climate, one manufactured by electricity, water, and machines. Because the heat does not relent at night, the cooling cannot relent at night. If a severe disruption were to compromise the power grid during a humid summer week, which is a purely hypothetical scenario but one planners must consider, the glass towers would not take days to become uninhabitable. Without the mechanical extraction of heat and humidity, the internal environment of a sealed skyscraper quickly mimics the dangerous conditions outside. The tourism industry, which demands flawless comfort, would face an immediate existential crisis. The weakness of an artificial climate is not that it cannot work. It is that it must keep working, and as temperatures push higher, the strain on the grid increases. But electricity is only one half of the equation. To keep the air cold, and to keep the millions of residents and tourists comfortable, you need an ocean of fresh water. There are no rushing rivers here. The groundwater is deeply depleted, so to supply its massive population, its sprawling golf courses, its luxury resorts, and its critical cooling infrastructure, Dubai relies heavily on the sea. The city is highly dependent on desalination. This is an incredibly energy-intensive process of extracting millions of gallons of seawater from the Gulf, treating it through microscopic membranes to remove the salt, and pumping it across the city. As the population grows, as the tourism sector expands, and as the climate becomes more demanding, the need for water skyrockets. The local water authority is constantly expanding its production capacity, projecting massive increases in output to meet the demands of the coming decade. Every new tourist arrival, every new hotel wing, every new residential district adds to this baseline demand. This creates a relentless cycle. More people and more heat lead to a greater demand for electricity and water. Producing that electricity and water requires more infrastructure and higher operating requirements. This, in turn, deepens the dependence of the city on these uninterrupted systems. Every hotter season demands another layer of protection. This is the snake eating its own tail, not because one machine creates the entire climate of Dubai, but because every new layer of protection makes the city more dependent on the machine protecting it. The more successful the city is at marketing itself as a global haven, the more tourists it attracts. The more tourists it attracts, the more cooling and water it must provide. The more it provides, the larger and more fragile the invisible machinery becomes. What unsettles me is not that Dubai uses technology. A desert city has no alternative. What unsettles me is that the technology has no pause button. It is a system built for endless growth, running at maximum capacity, with no margin for rest. And then, just when the city thought it had mastered the heat, the threat changed shape completely. In April 2024, the problem was no longer that Dubai could not cool down. The problem was that the water could not get out. April 16, 2024. The sky turned a dark, bruised purple. The sun vanished, replaced by an unnatural twilight, and then the sky broke open. It did not just rain. Within hours, the pristine multiple-lane highways that form the arteries of the economy disappeared under rapidly rising muddy water. Traffic ground to an agonizing halt. Thousands of commuters, delivery drivers, and tourists found themselves trapped inside their vehicles as the water crested over their tires. Abandoned luxury cars floated in the underpasses. Inside the famous megamalls, ceiling panels buckled under the weight of the deluge, sending water crashing into luxury boutiques. The international airport, one of the busiest aviation hubs on the planet, descended into absolute chaos. Runways transformed into lakes. Hundreds of flights were canceled, leaving tens of thousands of transit passengers stranded on the terminal floors. The tourism machine, designed to operate with frictionless perfection, suddenly snapped. A city built to conquer the desert was completely paralyzed by the sky. The human toll was deeply sobering. 4 people were killed in the United Arab Emirates as roads, vehicles, and daily life fell into chaos. Families could not reach their homes. Emergency services struggled to navigate the flooded grid. The polished image of the city was replaced by a raw and terrifying reality. In the aftermath, speculation ran wild. Many blamed cloud seeding, searching for a simple technological scapegoat. But the truth is far more complex and far more systemic. The World Weather Attribution Initiative and meteorological researchers, including experts at Khalifa University, analyzed the event. They concluded that this catastrophe was not caused by a few planes spraying salt flares. It was the result of a massive, slow-moving, low-pressure system dragging an immense volume of moisture from the tropics. Furthermore, exceptionally warm sea surface temperatures in the surrounding waters provided extra energy and moisture to the storm. The researchers warned that a changing global climate is increasing the likelihood and intensity of these extreme rainfall events. Dubai spent decades building shade, cooling air, and protecting people from a sky that rarely rained. It engineered an entire economy around the promise of eternal sunshine and predictable comfort. Then, in a single day, that same sky turned its roads into rivers. This was not proof that Dubai was about to disappear. It was proof that the climate assumptions behind the city were no longer sufficient. The response from the government was swift and massive. 2 months after the flood, Dubai approved the Tasrif project, which is one of the largest drainage infrastructure initiatives in the history of the region. With a staggering budget of approximately 30 billion dirhams, the project aims to increase the capacity of the rainwater drainage system of Dubai by an astonishing 700%. It involves a massive network of deep tunnels designed to absorb and redirect the sudden violent deluges that the city now knows are possible. This is an incredible feat of urban planning and financial muscle, but look closer at what this bill represents. 2 months after the flood, Dubai approved one of the largest drainage projects in the region. The bill does not prove the city has lost. It shows how expensive continuing the fight has become. This is the hidden crisis beneath the surface of the tourism brochures. Dubai is fighting a multiple-front war. It must simultaneously increase electricity capacity to fight the relentless creeping heat. It must expand desalination to quench the thirst of a growing population and a booming hotel sector. It must maintain millions of tons of district cooling infrastructure. It must enforce labor laws to protect workers from severe physiological strain. And now, it must completely retrofit its subterranean architecture to survive extreme, unpredictable floods. Each of these solutions, taken individually, is logical and necessary. The tragedy is that all of these systems must operate flawlessly, all at the same time, and none of them are ever allowed to fail. If the drainage works, but the cooling grid fails, the city suffocates. If the power holds but the water runs out, the city stops. The economic pressure of maintaining this perfection is astronomical. When a city must redesign the way it handles sunlight, darkness, water, and air, all at the same time, is that still victory over nature, or the maintenance fee for a permanent truce? Dubai has not failed. The economy is still moving, the airports are clearing runways, and the developers are still pouring concrete. But Dubai is no longer allowed to rest. Look again at the city at 3 in the morning. The towers are still glowing, casting long reflections over the dark waters of the Gulf. The asphalt is still radiating the fire of yesterday. The massive chillers on the rooftops are still roaring, forcing cold air into the lobbies of five-star hotels. The city is holding its breath, waiting for the dawn, completely reliant on a network of wires, pipes, and turbines that cannot sleep. Dubai was built as the ultimate proof that human engineering could overcome any geography. It proved that capital and technology could invent an environment where none existed. But the artificial environment has one fatal flaw. It must be relentlessly maintained. Nature does not need to destroy the entire city in a single apocalyptic stroke to prove its point. It only needs to turn up the heat by a few degrees. It only needs to push a slightly thicker layer of marine humidity onto the shore, or send one storm larger than the concrete was designed to swallow. Dubai has not vanished. The towers are still glowing, and the malls are still cold. But behind that glow is a machine that can never be allowed to stop, and perhaps that is the real cost of defeating nature. The battle never ends. This documentary is an analysis based on public data, peer-reviewed research, and official reports available at the time of production. Climate, economic, and infrastructure conditions are subject to change. This video examines systemic vulnerabilities and environmental pressures. It is not intended to target any specific community or nationality. The information presented does not constitute financial, investment, or travel advice. Some conclusions are analytical inferences drawn from the cited sources regarding the long-term sustainability of urban systems. If you value documentaries that look beyond the skyline and investigate the complex systems keeping our modern world alive, please subscribe. The next warning sign is rarely where the brochure tells you to look.